Across all fiction, for as long as stories have been told, the end of the world and what comes after has been one of the most popular settings and genres for that storytelling. That's obviously bled over into video games as well, where post-apocalyptic settings for video games remain among the most popular and common ones across its entire decades-long history. No matter the genre of video game, at some point or another, someone attempted making a post-apocalyptic take on it. You might think this is an exaggeration, but you'd be surprised. With so many different post-apocalyptic titles and across so many styles, picking the very best ones across the entire history of the medium may feel like a losing battle. However, that's exactly the task we set for ourselves. The end result? Here are 30 games that we believe comprise the very best post-apocalyptic ones on offer. Cataclysmo. You're going to see a lot of games from unexpected genres on this list, and we're kicking things off with one of those. Cataclysmo, which is a tower defense real-time strategy game in a post-apocalyptic setting. Which actually doesn't sound that weird. Unit creation, resource gathering, base building, and tower defense are all elements that lend themselves well to a post-apocalyptic setting's contextual flavoring. And so, Cataclysmo actually ends up working surprisingly well. There are some rough edges here. The game only launched in early access on Steam earlier this year, and this is very much still a work in progress. But I think the developers are onto something great here, and players who take on this game will find it to be a unique spin on its setting, as well as its mechanics. Chernobylite Complete Edition. Obviously, nuclear disasters, whether planned or otherwise, are behind a lot of the post-apocalyptic settings that we get into in media these days. It makes sense. The better part of the last 100 years, the entirety of humanity has existed under the shadow of the possibility of nuclear war breaking out. And if that were to happen, there's nothing to look forward to other than an irradiated landscape. And that's exactly the harsh, bleak setting that Chernobylite Complete Edition is set in. Mixing survival horror elements with non-linear storytelling that responds to player choice, Chernobylite is a stark game that impresses the weight of not just the decisions that you're making as you play it, but also the decisions made in the past which led the world to the ruined junctures that you find yourself at in its story. Terminator Resistance. James Cameron's excellent Terminator franchise is a stalwart of the science fiction genre, hugely influential and enduring in Hollywood not just for the CG and special effect techniques that it pioneered, but also for its excellent world building and lore that fuels continued, possibly misguided attempts to mine more out of the movie franchise decades after it started to run out of steam. Terminator Resistance itself is a part of the wave of media from the franchise that, while compelling, presents themselves with several major flaws. A lot of the criticisms the game got were leveled at it being bland and boring, but let's face it, the game is a shooter letting you fight in the original post-apocalyptic war fought between Skynet and the Human Resistance Army. If you're a Terminator fan, that alone is enough. And as a game, one that allows you to fight in one of the most iconic apocalyptic conflicts in fiction? Yes please. Stellar Blade. Shift Up's first console game takes more than a few cues from many action games of the past, including in the post-apocalyptic ruin world setting. Yep, like its contemporaries, Stellar Blade has you fighting for the future of the species at a time when they have already driven the world to the edge of ruin. While the setting of the game is not the best substantiated, strong gameplay and great progression systems help Stellar Blade stand out as a must-play game for fans of action games. The First Descendant. If you frequent GamingBolt, chances are you're already familiar with The First Descendant, the excellent new cooperative shooter in the style of Destiny that's been making its waves this year. Like Destiny, The First Descendant finds itself taking place in the wake of a cataclysmic event that leaves humanity at the brink of extinction. Some extremely rich world building paired with a well-executed, if tropey narrative makes The First Descendant one of those thrilling game stories that players might not even necessarily associate with being post-apocalyptic right away. But start digging into it, and you end up with a version of the end of the world that's extremely rich, and one that you'll want to spend more time taking in all of the intricacies of. The Last Stand Aftermath. I promised a bevy of genres showing up on this video, and here's the first appearance of roguelike games on this list. Again, this is a genre that lends itself extremely well to the post-apocalypse. You're playing, as the name suggests, the last gaggle of survivors of humanity in the wake of a world-ending event. You'll spend time exploring the ruins of civilization every time you set into the procedurally generated wilds. An intriguing setting mixed with some great mechanics that help mix narrative and gameplay makes this a unique experience well worth playing for people who like post-apocalyptic worlds or roguelike games in general. Fallout London. Fallout London is another one of our favorites here on GamingBolt. This fan mod for Fallout 4 is an astonishing work of coordinated fan effort, essentially using the Fallout 4 engine to create an altogether new Fallout game, but set in London. Where the series typically concerns itself only with the United States contending with the post-nuclear world that they found themselves in, Fallout London is set in London. And this being a fan-made mod doesn't mean that what you get here is a limited slice of London. No, the total size of London here is about as big as the Commonwealth in Fallout 4 was. Like the core Fallout games, many of which you will see featured on this list later, Fallout London does an amazing job of immersing you in its ruined world. Americana may be central to the identity of Fallout, but if London proves anything, it's that we could take more of this series venturing beyond American borders. State of Decay 2 Juggernaut Edition. State of Decay 2 may have divided opinions around launch, but years of post-launch support as well as an enthusiastic community building up around it have transformed the game into something entirely different. The game has lost a lot of the jank and bugs it was criticized for at launch, and you're left with a stellar open-world cooperative action-adventure survival experience that is truly unlike anything else on the market. Yeah, exploring a world in the wake of zombies overrunning it isn't exactly a unique proposition, but doing it in the way of State of Decay 2 is something altogether unique, at least until State of Decay 3 comes along. Once Human. I'm gonna be honest, Once Human's setup and storytelling are just a smorgasbord of ideas and tropes that you've seen elsewhere. Amnesiac protagonist, check. Corrupt corporations, check. Genetically super enhanced protagonist, check. I know it sounds like I'm describing Final Fantasy VII or just about any cyberpunk dystopia, but what Once Human does differently is put you squarely in the wake of the destruction that's already been caused. You aren't trying to stop Rosetta from carrying through their plans. They've already done that. The world has ended. You're just going to clean up the mess in what remains. Rage. Bethesda and id Software's Rage never quite lived up to its full potential, did it? Nevertheless, that first game is something quite different. Made on the Xbox 360 and PS3, the game attempted to deliver a full post-apocalyptic open world with drivable vehicles for players to explore. The idea was to emulate the Mad Max movies, which we're gonna return to later. Rage was technically ambitious, but the game parts never quite came together the way everyone expected them to. While it remains a flawed game, it's still a unique curio that merits a look from anyone who wants to see id Software at a time when they were still struggling to find their footing in a world that had moved well past them. Wasteland 3. While Wasteland 2 had failed to properly follow up on the classic CRPG in the way that fans may have expected, Wasteland 3 ended up being exactly the kind of modern entry into the franchise that fans were hoping for. Sharp humor, a great story, quality of life additions such as a vehicle to make traversing the world easier, and not as many bugs as Wasteland 2 made this new entry a hit. If you like Fallout, this franchise is what to check out, and Wasteland 3 is arguably its best incarnation yet. If you're going to be playing a CRPG that lets you explore the nuclear wasteland, let it be this one. Frostpunk 2. Here's another left-field genre that you may not have seen coming on a post-apocalyptic games list. City builders. Much like the original Frostpunk, Frostpunk 2 sees you making a substantial human city in the wake of a volcanic catastrophe that envelops the world in a global winter. Like that game, you'll be making a lot of complicated choices and decisions. Some logistical, like in any other city builder, but the others a lot more ethically and morally thought-provoking. You wouldn't expect a city builder to be the game that really makes you examine the post-apocalyptic settings with a more nuanced and critical eye. But Frostpunk 2 does exactly that by putting you in the driver's seat. Dead Island 2. A game that spent an absurd amount of time in development, so that by the time it finally released, it was viewed as having defied all odds simply by making it to the market. Certainly no one expected it to be particularly great at anything, but it did end up being surprisingly good. Releasing in a packaged year like 2023, which was stuffed to the brim with all-time classics, Dead Island 2 still managed to stand out and carve a niche for itself with its central gameplay being extremely fun, and its scope, smartly, not allowed to spiral out of control, keeping the focus squarely on things that the game was good at. Against all odds, Dead Island 2 ended up being a great game. Not just a great game, but one good enough to find itself on a place on this list. Mad Max. I did say we're going to get back to Mad Max earlier, didn't I? The 2015 game, presumably meant to release as a companion to George Miller's amazing revival of his iconic action movie series, Mad Max Fury Road, flew under the radar at the time owing to the proximity of its release to Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain, as well as early impressions which indicated it was a fairly bog-standard open-world game in the Mad Max settings. Which was great. Players ended up being completely fine with the idea of a regular old open-world game in the rich, horrifying, stark open world that George Miller created for his action car movie series. Few titles simultaneously scratched the itch for a classic open-world game as well as a traditional post-apocalyptic setting like this one does. Definitely give it a go. Armored Core 6: Fires of Rubicon. With last year's Armored Core 6: Fires of Rubicon, FromSoft put any concerns to bed that they were just a one-genre hit wonder. While From have made a series of beloved acclaimed games since 2009's Demon's Souls, most of them were riffs on the central compelling action role-playing formula that they pioneered with Demon's Souls, and continued to iterate on in future games. Armored Core 6, which saw the returning of the fan-favorite cult classic mech action franchise that they originally cut their teeth on, it's a high-quality title with the same mechanical design and proclivities FromSoft exhibits in other games now. Oh, and it's a mech action post-apocalyptic game, and while you'd expect there to be a lot of those, this is definitely the best one that your money can buy you. Days Gone. Sony Ben's Days Gone wasn't the best received Sony title at launch. It released in a poor state with a lot of bugs, and its derivative setting and structure made it feel like a lesser version of tropes that other games in Sony's stable were already executing better. However, Sony Bend put out a string of updates that polished the game up, added a bunch of quality of life improvements, and generally bring it closer to their intended vision. While Days Gone is still a flawed game that not everyone will love, it's nonetheless an interesting entry into the zombie apocalypse genre, particularly as video games go, an open-world narrative-driven cinematic action-adventure game with survival and horror elements. Feels like a lot for one game to juggle, and Days Gone often trips and fumbles. Thankfully, the highs are so high that they make up for its failings elsewhere. The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker. The Zelda games are no strangers to post-apocalyptic settings. The very first game in the franchise is technically set in a post-apocalyptic Hyrule, and the setting has shown up, at least at some point or the other, in various games since, including Zelda 2 and most recently Breath of the Wild. But it's The Wind Waker that's arguably the best and most unique take on a post-apocalypse that the series has ever seen. Set in a world drowned by a cataclysmic flood after the return of Ganon, could not be prevented in other ways. The game sees you, as both Link and the player, set out and learn more about not just the world as it is right now, but also the Hyrule that used to be before it was drowned out by the Great Sea, and how the two kingdoms' fates are inextricably intertwined. The Wind Waker is one of the best games in the Zelda series, a series known for frequently putting out titles that qualify as among the best of all time, so it's well worth playing. It's a great game and a great post-apocalypse. Fallout 4. We did promise you Fallout would show up on this list multiple times, and yeah, here it is a second time. Fallout 4 is a step down from Fallout 3, the game that brought the franchise to mainstream attention and cemented Bethesda Game Studios as industry heavyweights in many regards, from atmosphere to writing to role-playing elements, but at the same time, it's a triumph in many other ways. The feeling of exploring a ruined, desolate world that is housed by nothing but hostile dangers that will kill you the first chance they get is unmatched by any other game. Fallout 4 lets you truly roleplay being a person out of time in a ruined world that they no longer recognize. And it does it while having some of the best combat and gear systems in the series, even if other things such as quest design and progression mechanics, do take a hit in the process. Stalker: Legends of the Zone Trilogy. The original Stalker games never quite got the time in the sun, or the appreciation that they deserve, launching in an unpolished and janky state in a very competitive and turbulent market. But their stock has risen over the years, and now they're widely praised and beloved. This immersive sim-style first-person action-adventure game has an unbeatable atmosphere, extremely responsive mechanics, and some of the most tense world-building that I've ever seen in a video game. Now, all three games with various updates made for polish and QOL are available in one package on PC, as well as all modern consoles. Yes, that includes the Switch. Ahead of the launch of its long-awaited sequel later this year, this is your chance to finally play the original game and its expansions, to see yourself what you've been missing. Dying Light 2 Stay Human Reloaded Edition. The original Dying Light ended up being an unlikely hit with its blend of parkour, survival horror, and role-playing elements in one package, making for an oddly compelling blend. Its sequel, which was long in the coming, is a worthy follow-up to the game, even if in many regards it doesn't quite match up. The emphasis on parkour and movement ended up leaving us with one of the best games ever to just simply move around in, and the increased focus on developing the story, characters, and setting inly helps to immerse players in the game's ruined world further. Both Dying Light games are well worth playing, but after all the updates the sequel got, we feel comfortable saying Dying Light 2 is the one that you should go with if you'll only play one. Tom Clancy's The Division 2. Other than Destiny, few games managed to succeed in the live service cooperation action role-playing genre where it carved a niche for itself. One of the rare exceptions ended up being The Division by Massive, which, with its grounded real-world setting and unique blend of PvP and PvE, created a game players couldn't get enough of. The Division 2 ended up upping the ante in every way and emerging as the superior game in every regard. At launch, it was criticized for a shortage of content compared to the amount its predecessors had amassed, but in the 5 years since, that problem has been more than addressed. If you want to explore and rebuild Washington, D.C. in the wake of a mysterious pandemic that wreaked havoc, few games are better than The Division 2 ends up being. Gears 5. The original Gears of War's incredible blend of post-apocalyptic horror and action is still unique. While many games have attempted something like that since, few have managed to pull off the exact same vibes and aesthetic as the original. Part of the reason there's so much hype for the upcoming E-Day is precisely because it's returning to smack dab in the middle of that setting. However, while returning to the start of it all is a compelling proposition, Gears 5, which is set decades after the Emergence Day and is following humanity as it attempts to rebuild, is still a great look at where the series is going to go in the future. And it sets up a narrative hook that still hasn't been resolved. Hopefully once E-Day is done, we can see how the Coalition intends to follow up on where Gears 5 left things. Remnant 2. We're now at the Souls-like post-apocalyptic games part of the list, and Remnant 2 is doubtlessly the best, most polished, and most fun one of those to play. The stakes are larger than they've ever been, since you aren't just fighting for the fate of the world, you're fighting for the fate of all existence, really. You're trying to save the multiverse from a cataclysm, and the Souls-like style combat mixed with the procedural generation as well as the excellent co-op makes Remnant 2 a great game to play, even if you don't care for any of its post-apocalyptic trappings. Metro Exodus. The third entry in 4A Games' stellar Metro franchise is the incredible Metro Exodus, a stunning showcase of visual art, atmosphere, and aesthetics, not to mention fully grounding the player in an incredibly well-realized version of post-apocalyptic Eastern Europe, rendered in this game as several large open hub locations. Amazing mechanics paired with a great story in addition to everything else mentioned, Metro Exodus is not just one of the best post-apocalyptic stories mentioned on this list, it's also one of the best games mentioned on the list. If you're yet to play it, you absolutely should. And play the other two games in the franchise, which have also been ported to modern systems too while you're at it. Left 4 Dead 2. Left 4 Dead has become such a fixture of pop culture and the collective consciousness as far as video games go. It's often very easy to remember that behind all of the cooperative zombie slaying action which it became synonymous with was a premise that attempts to substantiate and contextualize the reason that you're doing the things that you're doing in the game. Yes, the zombies are infected in the wake of a pandemic that wiped out all you-know-what, none of that matters. It literally does not matter. Left 4 Dead 2 is one of the best, greatest games ever made. You don't need me to sell you on it, and you don't need it to be post-apocalyptic for a reason to play it or justify its inclusion on this list. Dying Light. The original Dying Light shouldn't have worked when it did. When it first released, it was met with skepticism, with Techland not really having won the benefit of the doubt just yet, but its captivating blend of atmosphere, survival horror, action, and parkour turned it into a unique highlight that was unlike any other game on the market, at least until its own sequel. One that kept players playing and returning for years and years and years. Dying Light's version of the post-apocalyptic itself isn't anything special, but the game, the way that it lets you play, it lets you engage with its world and the hostilities that you encounter within are what set it apart. More than ever, Dying Light encapsulates the perfect post-apocalyptic video game. If you haven't played it already, you really should. It got almost a decade of polish, is available for pretty cheap, and is on literally every single modern system on the market. Horizon Forbidden West. Guerrilla Games' Horizon Zero Dawn captivated 25 million players worldwide by its unique, refreshing take on the post-apocalypse. Rather than finding ourselves in a ruined world, the Horizon games take place in a world where civilization is destroyed and people have reverted to more primitive existence and societies, with the one exception being the relics of the older technologically advanced civilization they find and include in their own lives, including the series' trademark robot dinosaurs. The open-world action RPG are well worth playing for their unique world building and great story, but the gameplay side of things, which sees you engaging in thrilling combat against imaginative enemies, that's well worth a reason to take a look at Horizon, and it's much better playing and looking sequel, whenever you can as well. Death Stranding Director's Cut. Trust Hideo Kojima to come up with the most bonkers, out there, unhinged post-apocalyptic setting ever. When Death Stranding was going to release, people found the trailers provocative, evocative, and completely cryptic, hoping and assuming that the game would help them make better sense of its dense fiction. It does and doesn't. By the end of Death Stranding, you have an understanding of the world that you're in, but you still don't really know much about it. The cryptic mystery behind its horrifying paranormal apocalypse, combined with unique, extremely engaging, and meditative unique gameplay, make Death Stranding an excellent title. Kojima does it again. The Last of Us Part 2. The original Last of Us game is one of the best games ever made, acclaimed widely for its great storytelling and characterization, as well as its taut pacing and fantastic gameplay. The Last of Us Part 2 manages to do the impossible and is better than the original. The greatly expanded gameplay, which gives players a lot more dynamic and emergent options during every encounter, mixed with one of the most ambitious stories ever told in a video game as a medium, not just in its content and theme, but also in its structure and format, which could only really have worked as a video game, and which does beg the question of just how the game will be adapted to TV in the upcoming second season of the HBO show. The Last of Us Part 2 is one of the greatest post-apocalyptic stories ever told, because it deals with the post-apocalypse to a shockingly little degree. The bulk of its focus is on the people who are left behind, and what being left behind ends up doing to them. Fallout 3. Yeah, we weren't done with Fallout, because the top game on our list is Fallout 3. It's very hard to overstate the sheer impact that stepping out of Vault 101 into the Wasteland for the first time in this game had. It's an incredible moment, and as you realize that there is a full post-apocalyptic world out there, complete with its own societies, factions, cultures, traditions, customs, wildlife, settlements, superstitions, and more for you to discover, you realize that this is it. This is the ultimate post-apocalyptic game. You inhabit and live in this world in a way that you do with very few other game worlds. You engage and interact with the people that you meet, making choices that will have far-reaching implications for you and for them, and engage in the best role-playing a Bethesda-made Fallout game has ever had. If you're only going to play one game on this list with the intention of getting that post-apocalyptic fantasy, let it be this one. You really can't do much better than this. Hey, did you know that we at GamingBolt upload new videos every day? Stick around, drop a like, subscribe, and hit that bell. And let us know what kind of content you'd like to see in the future with a comment below.